Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Luke DeWitt. First I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Luke DeWitt was born on July 15, 1989, and lived in West Mersey, England. This is a coastal town on Mersey Island in Essex. He lived with his mother in a semi-detached house. Luke earned a degree in computer science and performed various IT consulting. His skill with computers is what led him to meeting a woman named Carol Baxter in 2014. They were introduced by a mutual friend. Carol was looking for IT help for her shower mat business called Kaz Splash. She lived on Victory Road in West Mersey, just a few blocks from where Luke lived. Carol had been a teacher. She was married to a man named Stephen who worked in property management. The couple had 2 children together, Harry and Elena. Carol also had 2 children from a prior relationship. As far as her health, Carol had a condition that leads to an underactive thyroid gland called Hashimoto's disease. It had not really caused her many problems over the years, but sometime around 2021, she started experiencing troubling symptoms which she attributed to the disease. For example, she was fatigued, would shake, and suffered anxiety attacks. She was referred to a specialist who indicated that the symptoms were not connected to her thyroid. Rather, Carol was experiencing severe anxiety. It appeared as though Carol continued to blame Hashimoto's disease, even though anxiety had been identified as the cause of her symptoms. As Carol dealt with these symptoms, she received a lot of support from Luke DeWitt. Carol and Stephen thought of Luke as a member of their family, and he spent a lot of time in their house. Luke regularly mixed health drinks for Carol and would go with her to a gym and on walks. Carol considered Luke to be a valuable resource to maintain and improve her health as she battled the mysterious symptoms. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On April 9, 2023, Easter Sunday, at 1:45 p.m., Carol Baxter's daughter Elena called emergency services. Elena had visited her mother's house and discovered both Carol and Stephen dead in a room on the back of their house. They were both seated in armchairs. Here is what the police found during the course of their investigation. It was not immediately clear what caused the deaths of Stephen and Carol Baxter. There were no obvious signs of trauma. The police waited for autopsy results as they continued investigating. At one point after her parents died, Elena found a will in their house. Supposedly, the will had been created by Stephen and Carol. The document indicated that Elena was to be given 100% of Carol's shower mat business. Surprisingly, Luke was also featured in this will. He was to be appointed as the director of the company and have significant control. When Elena turned 30, the company ownership would be split 50-50 between her and Luke. Elena would have no power to remove Luke from his ownership position. The police found this incredibly suspicious and soon realized the will was fake. They wondered if Elena and Luke had something to do with the deaths of Stephen and Carol. As the police continued to investigate, they found another peculiar situation. On February 23, 2022, over a year before Stephen and Carol died, Carol received an email from a person claiming to be a physician in Florida named Andrea Bowden. Ostensibly, Andrea was going to help Carol with the mysterious symptoms she had been experiencing, like the fatigue. Carol and Andrea communicated frequently. They had contact multiple times a day and eventually exchanged thousands of emails. Among other things, Andrea supplied Carol a set of rules. For example, she was to stay rested, not argue with anyone, not go to work, and not use her phone. The police were curious about Andrea Bowden and sent her an email, but there was no response. On June 29, 2023, investigators received the autopsy results for Stephen and Carol. Stephen had died from consuming a lethal dose of the opioid fentanyl. Carol died from both fentanyl and an antihistamine called promethazine. The police now treated the case as a double homicide. On July 6, 2023, Elena and Luke were arrested on suspicion of murdering Stephen and Carol. Investigators determined that there was no evidence that Elena was involved and she was released. Luke, however, remained in jail. At the time of his arrest, Luke had a bag with him which contained fentanyl. He said the fentanyl belonged to his father, who had died in 2021. Luke intended on returning the medication to the pharmacy. The police searched the house where Luke lived and found many medications, including fentanyl and promethazine. They also seized 80 electronic devices, which contained so much data the police needed 5 months to review it. These data revealed a lot of information about what Luke was up to. Between 2021 and 2023, Luke DeWitt created over 20 fake identities, including physicians like Andrea Bowden and people who suffered from Hashimoto's disease. These people were all members of a support group. Again, Carol believed that Hashimoto's disease was causing her symptoms, even though she had been told it was anxiety. Using the fake identities, Luke communicated with Carol through email and WhatsApp. He offered her support and reinforced the idea that all of Andrea Bowden's instructions should be followed to the letter. Furthermore, he encouraged her to ignore the advice of her other physicians and recommended ineffective treatments, which had no chance of helping Carol. On March 31, 2023, Luke sent emails to Carol posing as a physician named Alan Mandel. This fictitious character ran a liver recovery program, which involved using a liver cleanse technique. Luke, as Alan, recommended that Carol and her husband Stephen consume health drinks prepared by Luke. It makes sense that Carol would be interested in this program because she had been battling those mysterious symptoms. However, Stephen did not have Hashimoto's disease. Why would he be interested in a liver treatment program? As it turns out, Stephen had a problem with his liver. Luke had selected a treatment which appealed to both Stephen and Carol, and they were ready to take the liver cleanse. On April 7, 2023, at 10:20 a.m., Luke arrived at their home. The police believe that he put fentanyl in the liver cleanse drinks he prepared for the Baxters. While he was in the house, Luke communicated with Stephen and Carol as Alan Mandel. So Luke was right next to the couple in their home on his cell phone, giving them instructions using a fake identity. Luke, as Alan, encouraged the couple to consume the liver cleanse, telling them that they should expect it to taste terrible and to make them drowsy. He promised them the effects were not harmful and would only be temporary. After consuming the drinks laced with fentanyl, Stephen and Carol were rendered unconscious right away. Luke left the house for a while as the couple was dying from the poison he gave them. Both of them died sometime that day. Stephen's time of death is not known. Based on pacemaker data, Carol died sometime between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. At 7:54 p.m., Luke left the house for the last time, locking the door before he departed. The police felt as though they had a strong case against Luke DeWitt. His trial started in February 2024. He testified in his own defense, claiming that Stephen was behind the fake identities. Stephen asked Luke to create them to encourage Carol to cooperate with the treatment. On March 20, Luke DeWitt was found guilty of both murders. 2 days later, on March 22, 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 37 years. When calculating credit for time served, Luke DeWitt could be released 1 week before he turns 71. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Prior to murdering Carol, Luke manipulated and deceived her for quite some time, using a complex and labor-intensive strategy. He created an entire cast of characters which worked together toward one goal. The mission was to convince Carol that she needed to follow the rules from the non-existent physician, Andrea Bowden. To stress how important this was, Luke even killed off one of the support group members named Linda. Again, Luke had created all these figures who supposedly had Hashimoto's disease. He led Carol to believe that Linda died because she failed to abide by Andrea Bowden's instructions. After this, Carol may have believed that any deviation from the treatment plan would result in her own death. Luke DeWitt had effectively manipulated Carol Baxter using fear. Item number 2. In addition to the manipulation, Luke tried to physically harm Carol prior to the murder. In January 2022, he gave her a capsule which contained attack. This prompted her to seek treatment at a hospital. She had stomach pain. An X-ray revealed the attack was in her digestive tract. It's also possible that Luke was responsible for Carol's mysterious fatigue. As I mentioned, the autopsy indicated Carol had promethazine in her system in addition to the fentanyl. Promethazine is an antihistamine, which has a sedating effect. Investigators thought it was possible that Luke was giving Carol this drug for quite some time prior to her death. Item number 3. In the 3 months between the deaths of Stephen and Carol Baxter and when Luke was arrested, Luke communicated with Elena, portraying himself as her best friend. In addition, Luke communicated with her using the fake identity of a theater director named Jenny. Elena had no idea that Jenny was actually Luke. They communicated multiple times a day, and Jenny was very supportive. There was no financial motive for Luke to do this. Rather, this behavior is consistent with the theory that he enjoyed manipulating people with these fabricated characters. Maybe he did it because he liked power and control. This brings me to item number 4. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Luke DeWitt was self-centered, insecure, impulsive, irresponsible, immature, manipulative, deceptive, sadistic, cold, callous, possessed superficial charm, had a sense of entitlement, and was exceedingly creepy. Despite these negative characteristics, many people were fond of Luke. 30 to 40 individuals offered to be character witnesses at his trial. Not surprisingly, some people found Luke to be strange and disturbing. For example, one individual described Luke as an odd character who would hang around the Baxters' house all the time and not talk that much. Even though Carol thought of Luke as family, she was irritated with him for spending so much time in her house and described him as nerdy weird. Not long before the murders, Carol's husband Stephen felt as though Luke was growing tiresome. He communicated this information to Andrea, who of course was actually Luke. So Luke found out what Stephen really thought of him. Stephen's insult may have been Luke's motive for murder. It's also possible that Luke was interested in Carol's business, but controlling a non-slip bathroom accessory empire rarely leads to homicide. Shower mat business murders are at an all-time low. After being offended by Stephen, Luke posted as Andrea Bowden and told Carol that Stephen was a bad husband. Not long after this, Luke committed the murders. Using a cell phone, Luke captured a photograph of Stephen and Carol in their armchairs. This was probably done because he found killing them satisfying. He wanted something to remember the special moment. Luke's method for perpetrating the crime was based on manipulation, but he was not particularly sophisticated. His tactics were described as comically obvious. For example, at one point he left voicemails for Carol where he tried to impersonate a female voice. Luke was not convincing, not at all. What made his crime possible was Carol's gullibility. Carol should have known that it would be very unusual for a physician to communicate with her multiple times a day and forcefully instruct her to follow a set of rigid regulations that ran counter to the advice of other physicians who had treated her. In addition, Carol never met Andrea Bowden in person or even saw her on video. All the communication was faceless. Carol desperately needed to believe that her symptoms could be cured, made her decisions based on emotions, and ignored a heaping pile of red flags. Luke recognized her weaknesses and amplified Carol's fears through his manipulation campaign. After the murders, Luke felt confident that he had outwitted law enforcement. He did not even bother to discard his electronic devices or the fentanyl. Luke brazenly carried the fentanyl around in a bag as if he was daring someone to catch him. Had he not been arrested, there is little doubt Luke would have continued his pattern of manipulation and homicide. He was a remarkably unusual and deeply unsettling type of offender who demonstrated how dangerous a criminal can be when their only motive is the pursuit of sadistic pleasure. The lesson learned in this uncommon case is one that is all too common. When people ignore warning signs, they open the door to catastrophe. Luke DeWitt was a predator who targeted gullibility like a cheetah targets a wounded animal, with focus, calculation, lethal efficiency, and a complete absence of remorse. Those are my thoughts in the case of Luke DeWitt. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.